what are you actually asking them to do? And if it's behave in a way that is fundamentally different to where they are today, it's not a tool adoption, it's a cultural change.
But from your perspective, what's actually happening there? When organisations feel that people are resisting change, what's actually going on, do you think?
Every single change theory I've ever seen used in business is not based in neuroscience, period. If you tell it something's going to change, it goes, oh, hold on a minute, who said so? And I'm not going to. So you're already putting blocks in your way by telling people you're going to do something different. And I know what you're going to get now. A load of people are going to go, oh, well, it's far more complicated and we've got this, that and the other going on. Here's another one.
Welcome back to The Change Show with Simon Phillips. Today, I'm joined by Virginia Holden, a decision science and systems change thinker who spent 2 decades helping organizations redesign the conditions that shape behavior so that outcomes improve without relying on persuasion, pressure, or people trying harder. She's currently the fractional CMO at Anique, and they're producing an AI tool that makes marketing simpler for founders and small teams by replacing lots of scattered tasks with one clear system. Virginia is also the inventor of the Bag for Life, a brilliant simple system intervention that permanently shifted retail behavior and created a category now valued at about $15 billion or pounds even. Now that'd be nice if you're going to get a good percentage of that, Virginia.
Oh, it would have been, wouldn't it? Yeah, no, back at the time, they wouldn't let me IP or trademark. When I say they, the company I was working for at the time, because I'm quite sure none of them thought it was actually ever going to work and I was never going to be able to get people to buy carrier bags. But because I hadn't asked permission and I'd gone directly to Waitrose and said, do you want to give it a go? And Waitrose had said yes. And they were going to pay for the cost of the trial, so cover our costs. They said, oh yeah, go on then. Can't do any harm, can it?
Wow. Well, anyway, I understand you've worked with all sorts of brilliant organizations like P&G, Mars, Vodafone, Microsoft, IBM.
Oh, dear God. Not IBM. I haven't worked for IBM. I have worked, history-wise, I've worked with them.
Brilliant. Yeah. Virginia, welcome. Welcome to the show. Thank you for taking some time out of your, what is obviously a very busy schedule to come and chat with us here. Tell us a little bit about your journey and what attracted you specifically to the work that you do.
Crumbs. Well, I'll have to date that all the way back actually to university, where I ended up doing a psychology degree because having done 4 science A-levels, not only was it the last time I ever listened to my parents, I was fed up with right answers. So you look at all the things you could do at university, and from 4 sciences, there were very few things that weren't pure science. And in fact, going back in the day, the chemistry department spent the first 6 months trying to convince me to swap to chemistry. But I stayed in psychology, and I was very, very lucky to be at the university I went to, which was Warwick, at a very particular space in time when they had a joint department with engineering looking at robotics. And one of the things that came out in the first robotics programming they were starting to do was the fact that robots needed programming and was really odd. They called it banal information at the time, which basically was things you and I just take for granted, right? If I throw something at you, Simon, you duck. Yeah. Okay. So there started to be an understanding that the brain was pre-programmed with various programs, things that had always been in our environment. And this was completely new. And that then set me off on this trajectory, which was, okay, well, if the brain's pre-programmed, we should be using that. We should understand it and then use it. There you go. That sort of sums up the whole thing of if your brain works in a particular way, we should not only understand that, but then apply it to where it has most impact. And for me, that had never been dusty academic papers and PhDs that sat on shelves. It was in the real world where people were, where you could actually make an impact. So I took one thing and put the other thing together and then went, right, let's go and have some fun, basically. So my whole approach is that's how it's been driven. It's the fact that it was quite obvious, and we proved then that the brain is pre-programmed. It's pre-programmed in a number of levels, but it's pre-programmed. So we use it. I mean, that's why Bag for Life exists. It's why all the work I do today exists. And that means it can make me very interesting in a business environment because I'm challenging, because most of business theory is not science.
Yeah. Well, I technically, I'm just
yeah,
thinking
sorry,
of an overlap then. So obviously here at the Change Show, we're interested in helping change makers go and make a difference. And one of the things that change makers say that they come up against is people resisting change. But from your perspective, what's actually happening there? When organizations feel that people are resisting change, what's actually going on, do you think?
Okay, so let's wind this back. Every single change theory I've ever seen used in business is not based in neuroscience, period. It's based in someone tried it somewhere and created a license and then sold it, from pro-sci all the way through, okay? So the biggest thing you need to understand before we even look at resistance is what 99% of change people do is not science. And the bottom line I would do for anyone to measure any change program, and that could be to change any behaviour ever, is does it grow new neurons? And if so, how and why? If it doesn't, it's not a behavioural change program. Behaviours only change when you reprogram your brain. And that's about how you lay down neurons. So let's come to resistance in a minute. And I want people to start to think of way upstream before you even get to talking to the group of people you're doing change and transformation on. But the first thing you need to look at is, do they really need to know they're changing? Because this is really important, because the brain is a very odd instrument. The brain is a predictive engine, period. What the brain doesn't like is things it can't predict. Therefore, what happens if you tell it something's going to change, it goes, oh, hold on a minute, who said so? And I'm not going to. So you're already putting blocks in your way by telling people you're going to do something different. That's the first one. So look at, do you really need to do it? So let's take Bag for Life, seeing it's the one most people know. Never asked you to buy a carrier bag. I never asked you to spend 10p, right? And yet every single person who's probably listening to this has given up 10p for a carrier bag and has probably got lots at home. So we changed your entire behaviour by looking at how you reacted within a system without doing the change. And I know what you're going to get now. A load of people are going to go, oh, well, it's far more complicated and we've got this, that and the other going on. Here's another one. An organisation doing a CRM. No one was putting any decent data into the CRM. Even though the CRM was really, 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 really good and it had all the features and it had all the change, everything had been done properly, and it just wasn't working. Because what they failed to understand is what they were actually asking people to do was fundamentally against the cultural system within the business. And the cultural system in the business basically, so it looks like resistance. It wasn't. The cultural system within the business basically said, I'm only as good as my vertical does or my practice does. Now, if I share data with you because I've lost some business, you're going to win business. And that means I'm going to be lower down in the partner chain. I'm not doing that. There was no incentive for people to share anything at all. So this is what I mean by looking at, before you start any change program, what is it and how? Two things. What's the brain doing on an individual basis and what are the brains doing on a group basis? Because change and transformation, going back to what we said at the very beginning, human beings are ace at change and transformation. We've taken the most complicated technologies we've ever developed and taken on board through everyone and used them. What tends to happen when you do it on a business basis is we're not using how evolution did change and transformation, and we're setting it up in a way that it fails because we don't actually understand what's really changing underneath for someone to adopt something and therefore to change their behaviours.
So if you come back to your CRM example then, what would be the correct approach? So rather than make it look like, you're working against the culture, what would be the correct approach in that?
Okay, so this is what we actually did, right? So, because this is for a very large global accounting firm. The first thing we actually did is got the board. Now, this is because in that type of organisation, trust, power and truth were held at the top. Not organisations are done like that, but this one was. So you look at who has power, who's believed, and how that permeates in the system. Right. So came from the top, and we got them to change how they valued people who shared. So what we actually got the board to start to talk about, and it cascaded through the system, was we value you if you share more than if you don't. So now what you're doing is you're shifting what's called group value attachment. You're basically saying to the people in that, it's not just about you, it's how you treat other people. But then they had to follow that up. And the way we followed it up, it's going to sound really funny, is we ran a competition, right? But we ran a competition over a very specific process. Now, two things I'd say, first of all, here. Number one, competition stroke gamification only worked because of the type of group we were doing it in. And one of my biggest challenges, people use gamification over everything. It doesn't work unless you understand the psychology of the group you've got. And I'm going to be very open. It was very white, very male, very middle class, I'm going to watch rugby all weekend, literally across the globe. So these people were competitive to begin with. So what do? We give them a competition because they're competitive and they're going to want to be better than someone else. So what we had was every time they went into a process where they were in an RFP, as in a contractual process to gain some business. Every time they went through the stage of the RFP and they won a stage, they got gold stars. And literally, so this was happening as league tables across the world. So, how many of the UK got, how many of the US got, and they were all invested in, right, we've got to get to the next stage of the RFP. So let's rewind. We were telling them they were only great if they shared. We've now got a competition mechanism, which is shifting what's called group value attachment, right? So instead of it just being me now, the group value attachment's to us. Then we had to do a third thing, which was because of the way the group had been structured, and literally if one practice did better than another, this practice earned more money. So what I've unfortunately done here, I created locus of competition within the system. So I see you as my competition, even though you and I work for the same organisation. Actually, the competition's really that lot. So again, what we did is every time they went through a gateway process or beat someone externally within the RFP process, we publicised it. We said, you've done really well. Today, I don't know, the New York office saw off Accenture, right? So what we're doing underneath here is shifting the locus of competition from internal between you and me to external. That's the only three things we did. And this is really important because it wasn't about at all, and it wasn't about the people. It was about how they thought about themselves within the system. And these are all the unconscious things people don't tell you. So that's the other challenge I would see is people always ask other people or a system, or you're going to launch something. You go, oh, right. What we need is people who want to adopt it. It's the worst thing you can do. Absolute worst thing you can do, because two types of people show up in that bit. And this is about how evolution drove change. You and I know all the time, going back to resistance, going back to laggards, people who don't want to. What you really need to understand about laggards is their role in evolution, which was to take something we were doing and make it rule bound and then police the rules. Because this is how new systems get into cultural identity. So they'll show up because they go, oh, we can't do it and we've got to do it slowly. So they can look like resistance, okay? But what you've got to understand is they have a cultural role. So you give them the right cultural role from the get-go. The first set of people, the other people who also show up are people called optimizers. Optimizers want to play with it till it breaks and make it better. Because in an evolutionary context, someone had great ideas. They're real outliers, those people. Then who got hold of it were optimizers. And they kept on going through it and through it and through it, going till it was the best it could be. And they go, oh, I've done my job. And they give it to another set of people. But this is what happens. So if you ask people, you get optimizers and you'll get what I call, laggards, who are two different groups, which are the rule makers and the police. So if you can imagine that combination interacting on a change process, None of them care. None of them give a damn about what happens to everyone else, because that's not their role. And you can see them showing up all the time. So my only thing, if you want to ever stop resistance and change, look at what you're actually asking people to change, to adopt something. Okay? What are you actually asking them to do? And if it's behave in a way that is fundamentally different to where they are today, it's not a tool adoption, it's a cultural change. And you need to understand how that is structured. And the other thing is, stop asking those people to volunteer for a change program, because you'll just get the wrong groups who will tell you nothing about how anyone else does it.
Love it. Absolutely love it. You also talk about SYAO in the work that you do. It's that space that people feel permitted to occupy. And
yes, totally.
It overlaps a lot with some of the thinking on psychological safety. So when do you spot when a team's permission to be honest is shrinking? Because quite often that's happening even though performance still looks good on paper, doesn't it?
Oh, this is really interesting. So the space you're allowed to occupy is defined for you by other people. It's not something you choose, and it's usually defined on a cultural level. And therefore, but also it will be overlaid, as said. So before we jump into that, let's be very clear about the sets of programming in your head which make you behave. There's an evolutionary layer. You can't change. You're born with it, right? Full stop. And that's a lot to do with physically how the world's constructed. As I said, if I threw something at you, Simon, you'd duck. You won't sit on a branch. Given the choice of sitting on two branches, one that looks really thick and one that's really thin, you'll sit on the thick one, right? You can't change any of those. The other thing you can't change is how your brain works in a social group and how it wants to attach to a group. And these are really, really important when it comes to looking at the spaces you're allowed to occupy, because a lot of the time you don't want to challenge what those are and where they are. Now, if we go back to what does that mean for psychological safety? And this is really interesting because I feel this word's been made up. I'm not sure what anyone really means by psychological safety. If it's, I can challenge you without being beaten up physically, mentally, wherever, then that's not actually psychological safety. Moves into how data, information and knowledge move around a group. Now, if I feel I haven't got permission to say something, then I am not going to say something that's blindingly obvious, because I am not empowered to do it within that group. So what you have to look at is how trust, power and truth, which are the three tenets underlying anything about how data, information and knowledge move, work in that organization. And here's one I saw quite categorically recently. An organization wanted to move into a complete new marketplace, Simon. They'd been in a marketplace that was quite old-fashioned, and they were used to being the top person, the top dog. That's all their management set up, knowing how to do something over here. They then moved into, let's say, a high technology marketplace. And they wanted to almost import all of their status from one to the other, somewhere they weren't known, didn't know them, and had actually been set up for a very long time. So they employed a whole load of new people who knew this marketplace really well. And then over the top layer of management, they took people from the old world. So people from the old world literally said, we want to be the top distributor globally for doing this because we are over here. And the people in the new world said, well, you can't do that because A, distribution doesn't work like that. And B, there are already people who do it. Now, what happened in the end is this division ended up being disbanded, and they took all of that money and they wasted it, because what they were is they were stuck in their own, because they were higher, all of these things these people wanted to do couldn't strategically happen, but they couldn't accept they were wrong. Now, you can see this playing out globally on a world stage at the moment. And we've all sat in businesses, just because the person at the top goes, today, blue is red, doesn't mean it really is. But every person in that system behaves like it is because they have no power, because they're not told they can occupy that space. So it's not so much psychological safety, but how data, information and knowledge move around that system. And until you get those people at the top to understand what they are doing and how they are seriously limiting competitive advantage of their business, that these people feel safe in doing it. Because in the end, what you're telling these people is, because I control your pay and rations, therefore, if I don't like you, I'll throw you out. So now I've got no way of earning money. So now, screwed for want of a better word, I have no future. Then your basics, that need in someone's head is higher than being able to tell the truth. So psychological safety is, for me, a misnomer when we start to look at system biology and systems. What you're actually saying is how you're constructed is wrong, how trust, power and truth work in your system is wrong. And what is usually the challenge with that is the people at the top, it serves them really well. They came up through that environment. And you'll hear really odd things of like, oh, well, I had to do that when I was in their place. But what you're not doing is allowing your business to be highly competitive. And I always use this really nice example. Bees. I'm a bee. I'm a worker bee, and I've gone out and found the best load of honey anywhere. I don't come back and go, I've got loads of honey and I'm not going to tell you where I got it from. I dance my little arse off and go, look, this is where all the honey is. We will survive as colonies so much better if we all go and get it. So this is that difference. And you can prove it also on a mathematical level. You can look at any business and how it moves data, information and knowledge around it and go, are you competitive or are you not? And I find a lot of businesses get very upset when they go, oh, well, we're not, are we? But then they go, and now we've got to change. And what they're actually saying is, I have to not have power. And the system needs to distribute it. So going back to psychological safety, I know that was a bit of a circle. If we're talking about psychological safety, is I need to stand up and tell you that's wrong. What you're actually looking at is how trust, power and truth are arbitraged within the system and whether someone's allowed to say it. Now, if they get beaten up, like this very large organisation did, it wasted millions, billions trying to get into this market. And it couldn't because it didn't listen to the people who knew the market, because power was held in the wrong hands to grow.
Yeah, I talk a lot about listening in business, and it's not just the standard. Have I heard what you said? It's have I heard the things that you haven't said just as much? Because the things that people aren't saying because they don't have that sense of trust, or they don't believe that or they feel a sense of fear of saying certain things because, as you say, maybe pay and rations will be withheld if they say the things that they need to say. That creates a real absence of what I like to call decision integrity. Because the decisions don't have all the data. The decisions that are made don't have all the truth that we know in our business or in our industry.
Yes, but it's a perpetual thing that happens. And what I find is most people at the top don't want to let go. They don't want to believe they're wrong. And again, that goes back to their own self-analysis, as they've been taught always to be right. I'm only of value to the system if I get 10 out of 10. We're taught that from as soon as we start school. That's wrong in an effective human system. And in fact, what I find fascinating is if you watch groups of children before they're put into an exam structure, they solve problems together. They do not try and solve them by themselves. They naturally solve problems together. So what we do is culturally, we then overlay a system which makes them think they can't. And we've taught them that value is knowledge to me, that value is power to us, right? And so I don't blame those people at all at the top, and a lot of them took a long time to get there. So if you imagine from the ages of 4 or 5 up to 45, 55, they've been told you are the sum of what you know. It is so incredibly difficult for them to let go of that because it impacts how they value themselves. Now, it can be done because actually it's far more human to undo all of that, but they have to be truly honest about the survival of the business they sit within? And do I really care about competitive advantage or not?
Yeah, I know. Why do we do that? Why do we set things up in that way, do you think? I mean, you can see it being absolutely perfect in the Industrial Revolution, because there were specific steps that needed to be done in order, but we're long past that. So why do you think our school systems and educational systems are still not shifting?
So philosophically and human history-wise, 100 years is nothing. 200 years is nothing. 500 years is nothing. We've been hominoids for about 7.8 million years. If you drew that as a line on the screen, you and I wouldn't even be here. But what we've got is so many people in charge of things who have no idea how humans work, number one. So the people we've got in charge of things only care about their own power. This is the nature of politics. They do not care about how we get better. What you do see, though, of political systems who think for 300, 400, 500 years, let's say like the Chinese, who have a completely different way of looking at it. They care in a completely different way. So they know they're going to be in power for 500 years plus. If you're only in power for 3 years, your shareholders are your voters, right? So you are going to drive permanently to a short-term outcome. So that, in the industrial context we sit within now, basically says we work in what's called an extractive economy. We're only here for what we can get out of it on an individual, on a company, on a country basis. Only really been in place for a couple of 100 years and is completely wrong, right? Because let's look at that system again. Let's look at systems and how a system works in an environment. Number one, resources are always limited. Every single accounting principle I've ever seen never looks at resource limited systems. They always think you can get more or buy more, and you can't, because they always look at it as material and not human, right? Human beings are very resource limited, how fast we think, how well we do things. That's one. Secondly, we've skewed the system to shareholders. So whether you're a government looking at educational policy, where your shareholders are your voters every 3 years, or you're looking at shareholders in a business every 3 years, if you're lucky, it could be every 6 months, okay? And they're just saying, get more out, get more out, get more out. Everything is viewed as a cost. Nothing is viewed as an investment for a future place to be. The challenge with the education system is shareholders. Who are they? How do I get back in? Literally, that's how governments work. And secondly, the fact that we have people in places in power, in politics and in business who have no understanding of human beings and how human beings are maximize competitive advantage. The other thing is, I saw something written the other day. Why are all historians on the left of right? Why? Well, I think you've got it in what it's just said. Human history says the further extractive economically you get, the worse your system survives. I mean, you can look at tariffs in the US at the moment as an example of that, right? Not only does it completely misunderstand the economic system, it misunderstands that bullying doesn't make someone do something. But the education system, there are alternative education systems, Montessori being one of them, right? So there are different ways, and it's not viewed as, and sometimes this lot get viewed as being, hippie or alternative, right? When was it alternative to care? Right? And not treat a human being as much as you can get out of them.
I know. It's, I'm not going to go on my high horse, Ginny. I'm going to stay here and just engage in this conversation, because I could go off on that when it comes to caring about people. And that perspective of, we've just got to get the job done. I haven't got time to care for people. And it's like, which job do you want to get done then? Because if you want to get this particular job done most effectively, you're going to need people. Nobody can work in isolation.
No.
And if you don't care about them, why do they want to work with you? It's, some of this stuff can be really simple, can't it?
I mean, that goes back to the reflective. It's only about profit, so everything a cost. Training becomes cost, right? So one of the latest things I've done some work on, and again, you can prove it mathematically, which a lot of people didn't think you ever could. But you can show in a system, if you don't, quick wind back. biological systems, there are and human systems. You can look at certain types of mathematical equations to see what genetic traits get passed on, right? And we know it only gets passed on if it's competitively advantageous to the species. Okay. So if you take those and you put them in a business context, you can prove to a business if it doesn't invest in itself and train, it will kill itself, right? And it's so for me, this is why I said my argument's always been just use the science, guys. Please, people, use the science. Don't just think that some management theory that someone came up with from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, or even 80s, okay, is right. Because usually those systems are biased. They were only male. They only existed in a specific space of time. And the data out of them can be only related back to those things. As a human being, you would not take a drug that had been tested that way. Why use that theory then, right? You just wouldn't. That's as bad as going, I'll place my cancer treatment back in the 1920s. Yep. But they do. It makes them feel safe, right? And you and I both know, again, Evelyn, so brain's predictive, that's where we started. It feels safer if it makes choices it knows and understands, right? And therefore, people don't do the hard things or challenge themselves because their brain is working against them. So sometimes I think a lot of, even just generally as change people, what we need to do is make sure people understand their brains and their systems are wired to make them stay in the same place.
Yeah.
But you can change it just by knowing your brain is trying to make you stay somewhere because it makes you feel safe.
So what of all this information are you prioritizing as you put your new product together?
Interesting. A lot of that is what am I? So if I've done change and transformation products for people and stuff. It doesn't, but in Annie Q, what we actually do is Annie is probably the most complicated set of AI technologies you've ever seen. Right? They've got, I think at the last count, our amazing engineers had built over 300 AI agents. Okay, all who work together for you. Democratizing that expertise, putting it in your hands. But it looks, if you just look at it as a platform, it's scary. It's like, whoa, no. So what my bit over this is to make that story really easy for you to enter into. So Annie is a little alien.
Yeah.
Okay? She's landed on this planet to make your life easier. Now, one of the reasons we've used an alien is because outsiders are allowed to say things about a system they're not part of. Number one. Number two, we've made her simple and easy, and the way the brand is built is very attractive for the human brain to look at. So it makes it simple. So the thing of overlaying a very, very, very highly complex, highly complicated IT system for something which looks simple, is easy to use, and doesn't cost a lot. Okay? That was the basis of bringing that into this sort of thing, and making that user interface, that UI, as simple as possible, whether you knew nothing about technology and nothing about marketing or social media, okay? Because we can't democratize that knowledge and give it to people easy and simply just by doing it any other way.
Magic. Well, one of the things I always ask people on the show, Ginny, is if you had to go back and give the 20-year-old Ginny any advice that would help her go and make a difference in the world, even better than you've done, what would the benefit of hindsight provide?
Crumbs. So this is quite interesting because having done Bag for Life and various things, I was 27, 28. I got married, I had a daughter, and then he died. And I stayed within the system too much, right? Because all of these pressures on top of you, I stayed at work, I stayed within the system, and I didn't fight. I was going to say, perhaps some people I've worked for would probably say I did. I didn't feel I did. I didn't fight as hard for the things I knew. I would have said, yes, today's red is blue. And I've never been that person, Simon. I've never been it. If anything had to be done or started or changed or talked about or risen up to the general consciousness, I always did it. Okay. So my friend pointed, we wouldn't have had a sixth form committee at school if I hadn't started it. When I actually applied for my university degrees, I didn't get an offer back from the university I really wanted to go to. And they said, it's because you wanted to defer for a year. That's the word I'm looking for. And I said, I checked the prospectus. Couldn't find it anywhere. So I went to the head of admissions for this university and I said, you've got to offer me a place because they just lied. Right? I didn't just count out. And they did offer me a place because they had got it wrong. Then I decided I wasn't deferring for a year. So I decided I really thought it wasn't a good idea to go there. I was a lone troublemaker before I landed. Again, when I was at Warwick in the psychology department, being a science, there was an MBA for science students and no one in psychology had ever done it. And I went and looked at it and said, I want to do that. And my department said, I can't. And I said, well, you can't stop me. Honestly, when I listened to that, I said, you can't stop me. And he said, but you won't have enough credits to belong to the British Psychological Society. I said, so I'll do more exams. You can't stop me. I did it. And then half the department of my year did it. So, and I stopped doing that. I stopped changing the system and sat within it probably for 15 years, 20 years, and stopped challenging and stopped doing these things because it literally politically used to get in my way. I mean, I remember when I was at Microsoft fighting hard, but I could have fought harder for the fact that I didn't believe pro-sci was a decent change theory because it couldn't show me neurotransmitter change. You've got to change behavior. You've got to change neurotransmitters. Period. So you need the right fertilizer, the right risk reduction, the right practice in the right group with the right story at the right time. That's how evolution does it. To this day, I really wish I'd never let that one go. In the end, I left and I went somewhere else, okay? Because I honestly believe that would have been my best chance of getting true change and transformation theory delivered. So if I was going back to her, I'd have gone, I know you think you have to fit within the system, even when it feels like there is no other choice. Do not do it.
Nice and simple to say. Yeah. And hugely challenging to enact, especially when the pressure mounts.
Totally, but at the end of your life, what do you want to be remembered for, or what do you want to think? And if I ever turn around and go, I didn't fight the fight, I didn't look after someone, I didn't make a difference. Literally, it makes me feel awful inside. Okay, I can't tell you any other way it makes me feel. If I hadn't stood up, I mean, what I ended up doing was being on workers' councils and doing stuff like that, which was enough, but it's still, I don't think I've delivered enough still today.
Yeah, I sense that unrest, and it's something that I notice in a lot of real change makers. People who are standing up for and seeking to make a difference. You've got to feel a certain level of tension with the way things just are currently, and want to do something about it. And
it's also a personal risk, right? Because if you step outside of the system, it's risky. And you've got to be able to go, what's worth more to me? And then I also look that I've managed to bring up my daughter, who, as in give her enough self-belief to go and follow what she wanted to do and not sit within the system. Right. So she now climbs, teaches, she's always liked the outdoors. But now she's actually fully trained as an outdoor instructor to the very highest level in so many different sports and outdoor stuff. When she literally finished her training and the people she was training with offered her a job, and she rang me up in tears and she goes, I've never been happier. I can't believe I get to do this as a job. And she sends me pictures. She was snowboarding the other day with some kids. She was then the day after they were walking over the Scottish Highlands and there's a stag walking in front of them.
Well, you're passing the baton on there in your family.
In a little way.
Inside the Change Show, who would you like to pass the baton on? Who should we talk to next? Who do you think's got some great change maker insights?
So, because AI is having an existential change to who we are and what we do, I would probably recommend the chap who's our chief engineer at Annie Q, Jean. because for two reasons. One, not only is he an outstanding engineer and he can talk engineering sense, but secondly, one of his drivers is to use AI democratization, not to limit human race, but expand it, but also not just as a cost. So AI we all hear about, and everyone goes, oh, job cuts, so nasty this, so nasty that. Well, only if you use it that way, right? Only if you use it that way. And because it sits with in an extractive system like we talked about, that would be the first thing you think about it. But AI can be used to move data, information and knowledge in a system and get it to the person who needs it without any gateway. It doesn't judge. It doesn't think, I'm not going to tell this person that because they might use it better than me. It goes, oh, that person in that job needs to know this. So he's very into that sort of thing. And I think we need other stories around AI about competitive advantage and democratization of data, information and knowledge.
Yeah, it is a bit of a fear response, but our system grows us in a way that is looking for the fear situation, isn't it? As opposed to the opportunity.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So going back to where we started, which is your brain is predictive. If it can't predict something, it shoves you into a state which says, get me more information. If I can't get that, I'm going to move into fight or flight. It's just the way it's been programmed. But you have to then understand that then that limits you, and you need to know it's just biology. All of these things that are happening are just biology. They're not real. It's just the way that your biology is making you feel. And if you accept that, you go, okay, I can do this. And it's not feel the fear and do it anyway, because that's not telling you where it comes from and why it exists. All it's telling you is feel fear and do it, which I never liked. I always want to know why. Okay, I spent my life, why does that happen? Why do I feel like that? Because our own biology and then our own social conditioning stops us. Now, we could take a very interesting view of that and go, it really plays to the people in power to keep us where we are. So if we keep people afraid, they'll stay where they are.
And on that super cynical note, we shall move to arguably the most important part of the show, Jenny, which is, what track would you like to add to the Change Show playlist? It's maybe something that's escorted you through life, or it's been pivotal at a specific moment in time. But what's the special track for you?
I'll give you a moment in time, and it will be, I was in a nightclub in Stratford-on-Avon when someone told me the A-level results were up at school. He'd convinced his mother to drive to Coventry, go to the post office because they hadn't got as far as that, and get them. And the track that was playing at that particular time was Yaz and the Plastic Population and The Only Way Is Up, because the A levels I did, the marks I got, and the university I went to fundamentally changed who I am.
Love it. Do you know what? That's a special track for me as well, but for a completely different reason.
Oh, wow,
so
okay.
I went to do Buna Camp. Did you hear about Buna?
Oh, Buna, yes,
Camp
in America.
So I was away for the summer in America, and in those days you couldn't really find out what was going on at home. And I remember getting into the car. Mum and Dad were relieved to see me because I'd had a bit of an emergency operation in the States. So they were like, he's alive. Anyway, I think it was almost the first question as I got into the car, which was, what's been the biggest hit of the summer then? And it had been Yaz and the Plastic Population. So that was it. I was brought up to speed so I could carry on with life. It's amazing what we prioritize as youngsters.
Oh, completely. But yeah, it was that particular song, that particular moment in time, finding out that. And I also convinced someone who was there, because I was staying in Stratford, I didn't have a car at the time, to drive me all the way back to the village so I could actually see what it was. So I found out my A-level results with this car's headlights on the front of the school, the front of school where all of the A-levels were.
Fantastic. Ginny, thank you so much for taking some time out today and sharing your insights for us here on the Change Show. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. When you get this Annie Q up and running and ready to launch. When's that going to be? Is it there yet, or is it?
Oh, she's available now if you want to go on and use her. And so it should be very clear. It's only $199 a month. So it's less than a cup of coffee a day. And she does you educate her. Okay. And that's really important. So it will take some time, but only about 4 or 5 hours. She then starts to act like a 45, 60 person social media agency for you. She builds all your posts. She posts them all the posts across multiple platforms, but she doesn't do anything unless you sign it off. Okay. So she does all the work and then comes back and goes, hey, I've done this. I'd like to post this. Is that okay? And you just tick the box.
So where can we find that? Is that at Annie Q?
Yes, annieq.com. You should have the link. If not, I can send it to you. It's great fun, very simple, or it looks simple to use, as I said.
And if people want to get hold of you, Ginny, what's the best way?
Oh, probably LinkedIn. Virginia Holden, and in brackets it'll say Ginny, but there is only one of me.
And we know why now after chatting with you this morning.
Oh yeah, yes. I'm not sure the world could cope with too many of me. Too many change makers. Probably not a great thing. Just enough.
Perfect. Thank you, Ginny. Take good care. And for those of you listening at home, have a great week, and we'll catch up with you very soon.